Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we unpack the sources that define the world's most innovative thinkers.
And today we are diving into the collected works of Richard Feynman.
Specifically, we're looking at the philosophy, the scientific method, and really the sheer joy of discovery captured in his famous collection, The Pleasure of Finding Things Out.
You know, Feynman was so much more than just a Nobel laureate in physics. He was this quintessential skeptic, an intellectual gadfly, and maybe the greatest explainer of the modern age.
Yeah.
And we're using excerpts from all over the place: interviews, lectures, investigative reports. It's material that spans his entire life.
From his earliest lessons right up to his final, really forceful critique of institutional failure.
Right.
So our mission today is to go beyond the fun anecdotes and really distill Feynman's underlying methodology.
Mm-hmm.
How did he turn these incredibly complex subjects, I mean, from the subatomic realm to massive government bureaucracy, into accessible, even joyful knowledge?
It's all about intellectual honesty.
We're looking for the practical takeaways, how to harness that central driving joy that you find in simply finding things out.
It's really a template for critical thinking. I mean, if you're feeling overwhelmed by information or, paralyzed by the authority of experts, Feynman offers a clear path.
Which is?
Doubt everything, visualize everything, and never, ever confuse the name of a thing with the knowledge of that thing.
Okay, so to understand the method, we have to start with the mentor, and that's Feynman's father.
Right.
And what's so fascinating is that the person who set him on this path wasn't a scientist at all. He was a uniform salesman.
Yeah, but he had this profoundly methodical approach to knowledge.
Yelvo Feynman.
That's right. He's the one who established that core principle of scientific literacy. Classification is cheap, but understanding is priceless.
Right, and the famous bird story just perfectly illustrates that. It's so vital today when we all mistake, Googling a definition for actually learning something.
Oh, absolutely. It's such a great scene. He's a kid, they're walking in the Catskill Mountains, and the other kids are teasing him because he can't identify a bird by its name.
So he goes and asks his father, and the lesson he gets is, well, it's just groundbreaking.
His father points out the bird, a brown-throated thrush, let's say, and then he tells young Richard its name in English, then in Portuguese, then Italian, Chinese, Japanese.
He lists all these labels.
And after listing them all, he delivers the punchline. He says, "Now you know the name of the bird in all the languages you want, and when you finish with all that, you'll know absolutely nothing whatever about the bird."
The knowledge isn't in the label.
Exactly. The knowledge is in the observation. The real science begins when you start asking the questions.
Like, where does it spend the winter?
Right. Or why does it sing that particular song? What does it eat? Who does the feeding, the male or the female? The point was that names are just tools for communication between us, between humans. They're not knowledge about nature itself.
And that lesson, it just inoculated him against the temptation of superficial expertise for his entire life.
It's an essential takeaway for any learner today, really.
Yeah, if you can define the term, but you can't explain the underlying mechanism.
You don't know it.
You don't actually know it.
Not at all. And that lesson came with this other amazing skill his father taught him, the ability to visualize scale and relativity. He'd use the Encyclopedia Britannica as their textbook.
The Tyrannosaurus Rex story is the perfect example of this. His father didn't just read dry numbers. He brought them home, literally.
He would read the dimensions, this thing is 25 feet high and the head is 6 feet across, but then he'd immediately scale it to their reality.
To their front yard.
To their front yard. He'd say, look, if the T-Rex stood out front, it would be high enough to put its head through our second-story window. But then he'd add the detail.
The head is slightly too wide.
So it would break the glass on the way through.
That instantly takes an abstract number and makes it visceral. It's not a number on a page anymore. It's a physical constraint in the real world.
And you have to imagine that skill was just key to his later career in physics, where he had to mentally visualize impossible things, like path integrals in quantum mechanics.
Right. He was constantly relating the macro to the micro.
It gave him the intuition. You can't just solve these problems with algebra. You need a qualitative physical sense of how things should behave. And that came from his father.
This hands-on approach, it naturally led to experimentation. Which brings us to the express wagon story.
Ah, yeah. A foundational physics lesson in a childhood memory.
He's pulling this little wagon, and he sees that when he pulls it, The ball inside rolls to the back. When he stops, it rolls forward.
A clear, repeatable phenomena. So he takes it to his father.
And his father's response is just a masterclass in separating description from cause.
Right. He gives him the principle, inertia, the tendency of objects to resist changes in motion.
But then he adds the most important part.
The crucial caveat, nobody knows why it's true.
And that distinction is everything.
It's the difference between describing something, inertia is a fundamental law, and understanding its ultimate cause, which, we still don't fully get at the most fundamental level. He was teaching him the boundaries of human knowledge.
Showing him where the science ends and the mystery begins.
But the lesson didn't stop there. He then encouraged him to verify it.
He suggested that maybe the ball didn't actually move backward. Maybe the wagon was just pulled forward from under it.
And young Feynman, being Feynman, immediately goes back out and runs the experiment again, this time watching from the side.
And he confirms it. The ball barely moves, but the wagon moves forward, making it look like the ball went backward.
It's that self-correcting loop. Observe, hypothesize, test, and then correct your perspective.
This whole process eventually leads to this really important intellectual milestone for him. He's teaching himself calculus from a textbook.
And he tries to explain it to his father, and for the first time, he realizes his father is genuinely confused by the material.
He had surpassed his teacher.
It was that moment. He said he had learnt more in some sense than he. It's a profound lesson in intellectual independence.
That real understanding, chased through curiosity, is the only authority that matters.
Right. Knowledge isn't a hierarchy. You can surpass even your greatest mentors.
So this intense curiosity, it inevitably brings us to a more philosophical question Feynman often dealt with. Does science ruin the beauty of the world? It's a common critique, right? The argument from his artist friend who claimed that by taking a flower apart, science makes it dull.
And Feynman found this argument just absolutely bizarre. He said scientific knowledge adds layers to the awe.
So when the artist sees the flower, he sees the color, the form.
The aesthetic beauty. And Feynman sees that too, of course. But he sees so much more. He sees the complicated actions inside the cells, the dance of photosynthesis. He sees the evolutionary epoch that led to that specific color, which evolved to attract insects to carry the pollen.
So he's seeing the aesthetic beauty, the structural beauty, the historical beauty, and the functional beauty all at once.
And it immediately opens up deeper questions that a purely aesthetic view just ignores. Why is it beautiful at all? Does that aesthetic sense exist in the insects that evolved to be attracted to it?
Science doesn't subtract from the mystery. It multiplies it.
It just shows you layer after layer of wonder you didn't even know was there.
And he connects all of this back to the need for a mathematical foundation, especially for fundamental physics.
Yeah, he's clear that you don't need math to appreciate something like love. But if you want to understand the ultimate nature of the physical world, the laws of the universe,
then a mathematical sense is non-negotiable.
it's the only language that lets you fully appreciate what he called the great depth of character of the universality of the laws.
That universality, the idea that the same equations govern an atom in a galaxy, you need math to really grasp that.
Without it, you're just left with a rough description. You fall back into that old trap of confusing the name of the thing with the knowledge of the thing.
So that sheer force of curiosity, that ability to find joy in solving any problem, it takes Feynman from being a curious kid to being a central figure in the Manhattan Project.
At Los Alamos. And this is where the joy of pure science just slams headfirst into this catastrophic moral application.
The transition it's stark. From intellectual play to an existential threat.
It's the most critical pivot in his life, and he reflected on it a lot later on. The initial reason for joining was ethically clear, right?
The fear of the Nazis.
The crushing fear that Nazi Germany would get the bomb first. That fear justified the work for a lot of the scientists, including Feynman.
But then came what he called his immoral action. It wasn't the decision to start the work.
It was the failure to stop and reassess.
Once Germany was defeated, the original threat was gone.
But the project had this incredible momentum. The physics was exciting, the engineering challenges were unprecedented, and he just kept working. He got swept up in it.
It's a chilling lesson in how intellectual momentum can just override moral thought.
And the psychological shock he felt after Hiroshima, it just reveals the magnitude of that. He said he suddenly felt that humanity was doomed.
He tells that story about being in a restaurant in New York City, seeing people building bridges and roads, and just feeling this terrifying disconnect.
He thought, they're crazy, they just don't understand. Why are they making new things? It's so useless.
Because in his mind, The end was a certainty.
Yeah, that sense of impending doom shows you the immense psychological cost of the work, which I think the excitement had masked before.
And yet, in the middle of all that pressure, Los Alamos was this incredible crucible for scientific genius. He was surrounded by the intellectual elite of the world.
Oh, it was an unparalleled education in high-level intellectual culture. He tells a fantastic story about the committee of great men, Tolman, Compton, Urey, Rabi, Oppenheimer,
The Titans.
the Titans, meeting to evaluate the project's progress. And he was used to the usual academic way of doing things where ideas are repeated and simplified until everyone gets on the same page.
But this was different.
They operated at such an elevated level. One scientist would make a nuanced point and another, like Compton, would offer a different perspective. And they didn't need to repeat anything. The chairman, Tolman, could just synthesize all the viewpoints instantly and say, Compton's argument is the best way forward, summing it all up without ever dumbing it down.
They listened, processed, and leaped forward.
A true example of collective genius. And even Feynman, who was already an expert at complex calculations, found himself humbled by minds like Enrico Fermi.
What happened with Fermi?
Feynman was doing these incredibly elaborate calculations for some problem, and he couldn't get an intuitive feel for why the numbers were what they were.
He couldn't see the answer.
Right. So he starts explaining the setup to Fermi, and Fermi just stops him, thinks for a moment, and instantly predicts the result, and then gives a perfectly obvious explanation.
So Fermi wasn't just better at the math.
He had a deeper qualitative physical intuition. He could bypass the long, tedious calculation and just see the answer. He was performing what Feynman was good at, but 10 times better.
A lesson that there are always deeper levels of understanding.
Absolutely. Now, maybe the most famous stories from Los Alamos involve his complete disdain for their security measures. He saw it all as a game.
And he was determined to expose how flawed it was.
He was constantly critiquing the bureaucratic security because it failed to understand actual physical reality. The top-secret documents for the bomb were kept in simple wooden filing cabinets,
Secured with common padlocks.
and he'd show people that you could just tilt the cabinet back, create a little gap, and pull the documents right out from a hole in the bottom. No lockpicking needed.
He saw it as performance, not protection.
And this leads to the ultimate prank, the teller desk trick. Edward Teller boasted that he kept his most important secrets locked in his personal desk drawer, not in those flawed cabinets.
Okay, but I have to ask, given the stakes, was this kind of mocking and distraction ever seen as highly irresponsible? I mean, was he ever disciplined for it?
That's a fantastic question. And the source material really only implies the answer. He was never disciplined because in the unique culture of Los Alamos, he wasn't really breaking the rules. He was proving the rules were useless.
So the scientific hierarchy based on merit trumped the military one.
In a way, yes. His pranks, while annoying, were a crucial check on the security apparatus. He was forcing them to face reality.
So how did he get Teller?
He snuck out of a meeting, went to Teller's office, and found that the back panel of the desk drawer wasn't fully secured.
Oh no.
He could just pull the classified papers out from the back, like you said, like a toilet paper dispenser.
And the punchline is just legendary.
He goes back and asks Teller if he can inspect the desk, and Teller just looks at him and says something like, "If you hadn't already seen it yourself."
So the trick failed because Teller was too smart.
Exactly. Teller figured it out too quickly, which denied Feynman the pleasure of the big reveal. But the story is a perfect demo of his skepticism. Always test the assumptions. If the physical reality doesn't match the procedure is wrong.
That intellectual curiosity, tempered by what happened at Los Alamos, it really directed the rest of his career toward grappling with the known and the unknown at the most extreme scales.
Yeah, let's shift to that expanding universe of ideas, starting with fundamental physics.
Okay.
So when Feynman looked at the universe, he saw that the behavior of the outer electrons and atoms was pretty well understood. That was governed by quantum electrodynamics, or QED.
A solved problem, in his view. The real complexity had moved inward to the nucleus.
Right. In the early 20th century, you just had the proton and the neutron. Simple. But then collision experiments started creating hundreds of other transient particles, pions, kaons, sigmas, lambdas,
The Hadron Zoo.
the Hadron Zoo, and no physicist could believe that 400 different particles were all truly fundamental.
Which led to the theory of quarks.
Exactly. The idea that particles like the proton are made of smaller fundamental units, 3 quarks, which have these peculiar fractional electrical charges, -1/3 plus 2/3. things you don't see anywhere else.
And this is where the modern challenge became apparent, the one he was grappling with. They have the theory.
They have the laws of quarks and gluons, quantum chromodynamics, or QCD. But as he put it, they were stuck in seeing what the consequences are.
A crazy position to be in. They knew the rules, but the equations were so complex they couldn't figure out what the rules predicted.
Because the strong nuclear force has this property called confinement, quarks can't exist alone, which makes the calculations just intractable with traditional methods. You can't simplify the strong interaction like you can the electromagnetic one.
So the math was too hard to predict what an experiment would show. How do you move forward with that?
Feynman realized he needed a qualitative bridge first. He had to invent a mental picture, an intuitive, rough understanding of how the strong force worked inside the hadron.
Which led to his Parton model.
Right. He needed a qualitative idea of the shape of the answer before he could build a precise mathematical tool. He used those visualization skills his father taught him to see the proton as a collection of weakly interacting point-like particles. Partons, which we now know are quarks and gluons.
It's the inertia lesson all over again. Understand the phenomenon first.
Exactly.
Okay, let's shift from the incredibly small to the, well, also incredibly small. His 1960 talk, There's Plenty of Room at the Bottom, basically launched the field of nanotechnology.
He was urging scientists to move beyond just miniaturization, which he dismissed. Writing the Lord's Prayer on a pinhead, he said, was primitive.
He was focused on true atomic manipulation.
His vision for information storage was amazing. He talked about encoding the entire Encyclopedia Britannica in a tiny cube, just 125,000th of its normal size.
And he pointed to biology as the proof of concept.
Right, nature had already solved it. The blueprint for a complex organism, all the instructions, is stored in DNA, which is a tiny fraction of a cell.
And the ultimate goal was to synthesize any chemical substance by arranging atoms one by one.
Giving chemists and biologists the power to see what we are doing. He imagined new materials with unprecedented properties, like layered atomic structures and perfect checkerboard patterns.
But he was also meticulous about the challenges. When you work at that micro scale, the physics we're used to fundamentally changes.
We forget that. At that scale, gravity becomes negligible. It's just not a factor.
So what's the dominant force?
Surface forces, particularly van der Waals forces. It's a kind of short-range molecular stickiness. So at the microscale, things don't fall. They stick together.
Meaning micromachines would constantly be seizing up.
Exactly. And then there's thermodynamics. He noted that you couldn't have an internal combustion engine at that scale because of rapid heat loss.
The surface area is too big relative to the volume.
Enormous. Any heat you generate just instantly dissipates. So micromachines would probably need external electrical power.
Now, moving from the small to the computational, Feynman was a major critic of the standard computer architecture, the von Neumann model.
The traditional sequential model. One fast processor running through steps one by one. He saw the future in parallel processing.
Using many processors simultaneously.
Thousands of them. He cited early examples like the Caltech Cosmic Cube and the MIT Connection Machine, which had 64,000 simple processors all interconnected.
And that architecture is great for problems where you can do local calculations, like weather patterns or wave propagation.
But this is where the programming challenge comes in. It's not just about more chips. Parallel processing demands that programmers start all over again.
Why? Why can't you just translate an old program to run on 64,000 processors?
Because of data dependencies. In a sequential program, step 5 depends completely on the output of step 4. If you split them up, they just have to wait for each other, and you lose the speed advantage. A parallel algorithm is different. Think of a weather map. The calculation at one point only depends on its immediate neighbors. So you can assign 64,000 processors to 64,000 different points, and they only have to sync up locally. The programmer has to rethink the whole problem from the ground up.
So it's not about faster computers, it's about a fundamentally different logic.
And he contrasted this with the human brain. The brain is much slower than a computer, but its interconnection is vastly more complex.
Thousands of nerves connected to each other.
Right, which is why the brain excels at things computers still struggle with, like instantly recognizing a face in a crowd. That's a triumph of highly sophisticated, local, parallel pattern recognition.
So whether he was exploring quarks or computing, all of Feynman's work was built on this absolute, non-negotiable ethical code.
Scientific integrity. It starts with doubting yourself first.
Always.
He was emphatic that science isn't just a body of knowledge, it's a specific methodology. It requires impartial observation, objective judgment, and, crucially, recording your results in a disinterested way.
You're not trying to persuade the reader.
No, you're just presenting what the evidence indicates. And the engine of all this is doubt. His famous line, "Authority may be a hint as to what the truth is, but is not the source of information."
Science progresses by attacking assumptions, not by following rules.
Which is where he introduces his unforgettable term, cargo cult science.
It's such a brilliant analogy.
It defines the practice of imitating the outward forms of science, doing statistics, holding meetings, publishing reports, without the core intellectual honesty underneath.
The analogy comes from those Pacific Islanders after World War II. They saw Allied planes land and bring all this wealth, this cargo.
And after the war, to get the planes to come back, they built these elaborate, non-functional wooden airfields, radio towers, even mock aircraft. They had the form of success, but they'd missed the mechanism.
And Feynman saw this happening everywhere.
He applied it to parts of social science, to so-called organic food experts who rely on vague associations, and definitely to fringe practices like reflexology.
Oh, that story is incredible. He overhears a guy doing foot massage who feels a dent in a woman's foot and triumphantly says it must be the pituitary gland.
Only to be told, no, that's just reflexology. It was a perfect example of substituting anatomical nonsense for real knowledge, just because it followed a rigid, established, but untrue protocol.
He even investigated ESP during the Uri Geller craze.
Yep. He went to watch Geller try to bend keys, but Geller kept making excuses. He claimed it worked better underwater, which led to this absurdity of them trying to bend a key in a running bathroom sink. And of course,
Nothing happened.
nothing happened. But the real danger of this cargo cult science, as he pointed out, isn't that it's just silly. It's that it intimidates ordinary people, especially teachers, who doubt these self-proclaimed experts.
It creates a false authority.
Exactly. And his defense against it was radical, the belief in the ignorance of experts,
The remedy for all this is his core principle of utter honesty.
which he defined as leaning over backwards to report everything that might invalidate your own finding.
So if you have 5 potential causes, but only one supports your theory,
You have to report the other 4. You have to detail why you eliminated them. You even have to mention facts that conflict with your interpretation. You have to be your own toughest critic.
he used advertising as the perfect contrast to this, with the Wesson oil example. An ad might claim, truthfully, that Wesson oil doesn't soak through food.
And that statement is technically factual, but it's scientifically dishonest because it omits the crucial context.
Which is?
That no oil soaks through food if you cook at that specific high temperature. If the temperature is lower, they all soak through, including Wesson oil. The ad omits the condition that makes the finding trivial.
Scientific integrity demands the full context, even if it dilutes your finding.
That is so relevant today, where data is constantly presented out of context. The key isn't the number, it's the conditions under which that number was generated.
And this honesty extends to funding.
He insisted that scientists have a responsibility to the layman who pays for the research, to be honest about the applications. If you're studying cosmology, you shouldn't invent reasons why it's vital for national security. If the public decides not to fund pure research, that's their choice, but you have to be honest about the work.
This entire philosophy, this mandate that nature cannot be fooled, it all found its most powerful public expression when Feynman served on the commission investigating the 1986 Challenger disaster.
His findings just cut straight through the bureaucracy and the PR fog.
His key finding, which he wrote himself, is legendary.
For a successful technology, reality must take precedence over public relations, for nature cannot be fooled. It was a direct indictment of the organizational culture at NASA.
A culture that prioritized schedules and appearance over engineering reality.
He drilled down into 2 specific areas of technical degradation that were just routinely ignored. First, the cracks in the turbine blades of the turbopumps.
The high-pressure fuel and oxygen turbopumps.
Right, the HPFTP and HPOTP, these are massive, essential machines. They were designed to operate perfectly for 10 missions, but cracks started showing up almost immediately.
And this is where the safety factor, that engineering buffer, began to erode.
It was a slow managerial decay, a normalization of deviance. Originally, if a component cracked, it was a failure, period.
But the standard shifted.
Yeah. Engineers started accepting components with cracks, arguing that they grew slowly and were safe enough. The certification standard went from requiring proof for 10 missions down to accepting parts if just 2 samples ran for twice the time needed for a single mission.
So the definition of success became, we got away with it this time.
That's it. They were using definition games to fool themselves into thinking they were safe. The safety factor was nearly 0.
But the more famous failure, the catastrophic one, was the O-ring seal on the solid rocket boosters.
Yes. The O-rings were crucial rubber seals, and the engineers had repeatedly and strenuously warned management that those seals could not work properly in cold temperatures, specifically below 53 degrees Fahrenheit.
And the launch temperature that morning was
36 degrees. Management, under immense pressure, chose to overrule the engineers based on flawed data. It was cargo cult science in action.
They were looking at data that showed successful launches at temperatures that were just slightly warmer than previous failures, and they concluded the cold wasn't the main problem.
When it was the problem.
And the final dramatic demonstration of this came from Feynman himself during the hearings.
He took a small piece of the O-ring material, clamped it like it was in the joint, and then just dropped it into a glass of ice water.
Live, in front of the commission.
He showed them that the material lost its elasticity. It hardened and failed to spring back. He proved, visibly and empirically, that in the cold, the seal would not work.
He brought reality into the boardroom.
He showed them you don't need a supercomputer simulation. You just need to trust the simple physics that the engineers already knew and management had ignored.
The bitter irony is that this total failure of hardware and management contrasted so sharply with the orbiter's digital systems.
The computers themselves were a triumph of reliability. They used 4 identical computers running in parallel. If one disagreed, the other 3 would take over. The digital logic was nearly infallible.
What?
But a perfect computer system can't save a vehicle if the underlying material reality is governed by flawed human processes and bureaucratic negligence. The system was only as strong as its weakest link.
And the weakest link was the political pressure on a piece of rubber.
So when you combine Feynman's radical skepticism, his commitment to visualization, and his fierce intellectual honesty, you get this profound, cohesive worldview.
One that connects the movement of subatomic particles to the grand moral questions of existence.
He found the perfect analogy for this at a Buddhist temple in Honolulu. The proverb was, "To every man is given the key to the gates of heaven. The same key opens the gates of hell."
It's the ultimate reflection on scientific knowledge.
Science provides the key. It gives us immense power to change the world, to manipulate reality. But that key, that knowledge, it comes with no instruction book on how to use it for good or for evil.
The moral choice is entirely on us. It's external to the knowledge itself.
And this inherent lack of certainty, this humility about ultimate truth, is what he saw as science's greatest gift to society. He argued the scientific mindset is the antithesis of closed totalitarian systems like communism.
Because in those systems, the answers are absolute. They're dogma, not subject to doubt.
But science lives and breathes doubt. Scientific statements aren't absolute truth or absolute falsity. They are known to different degrees of certainty.
And that constant doubt isn't a weakness. It's the engine of progress.
Absolutely. Progress requires being modest, admitting the current theory might be wrong, and always asking questions out of genuine curiosity. And he saw this as having crucial political implications.
The democratic government, which allows discussion and modification,
is much more consistent with the scientific approach than a tyranny of fixed ideas.
even if democracy seems inefficient, what the English call muddling through.
He saw muddling through as iterative improvement, a self-correcting system. Tyranny claims absolute certainty, so eventually hits a dead end because it can't correct its own foundational errors. Democracy, rooted in doubt, is the most robust way to progress.
And finally, we get to the conclusion that gives the collection its title. His deeply personal reflection on the grand adventure of existence.
He describes standing at the seashore, watching the waves. He sees mountains of molecules, each stupidly minding its own business, yet forming white surf in unison. He's observing this chaotic, vast, yet profoundly organized system.
And then he places himself within that cosmic context.
He sees himself as atoms with consciousness, matter with curiosity. He's standing there, wondering, being a universe of atoms, an atom in the universe.
The ultimate value he got from his life wasn't the awards or the fame,
but simply the intrinsic, unparalleled pleasure of finding things out. The more you learn, the deeper and more wonderful the mystery becomes.
The journey of discovery is the reward. #outro.
That combination of tireless curiosity and fierce intellectual honesty, that's the Feynman legacy. And the key lessons for you are clear. Never mistake naming for knowing. Relentlessly visualize the abstract, and always, always avoid cargo cult science by leaning over backwards to prove yourself wrong.
Because as you proved with the Challenger, reality must always, always precede public relations.
And if you want a final, truly provocative thought to take away, consider a biological mystery that fascinated him.
Okay.
Feynman noted that in all of biology, there's nothing yet found that indicates the inevitability of death. Biologists just accept it as a given, but mathematically, chemically, there's no proof of its necessity.
What does that mean?
It suggested to him that death is not inevitable, that a cure for what he called that terrible universal disease or temporariness of the human's body will be cured. He believed that if science stopped accepting death as a given and started treating it as a complex, solvable physical process, we might just solve it.
That's a stunning proposition. That our acceptance of death is maybe the ultimate act of cargo cult science. We accept the form death happens, and we stop searching for the underlying mechanism that could prevent it.
It's an encouragement to embrace uncertainty in your own field, to recognize when you're following the form of success instead of the substance of knowledge, and to always choose that difficult path of truth.
Knowing that the grand adventure continues as long as we keep asking why.